Good day to you. My name is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. My guest today is Ian Venter, who was in the BSAP. And as I mentioned to him offline, I've always liked stories from guys in the police. It was a diverse force from uniform to ground coverage to many other aspects. So I'm looking forward to your chat, Ian. And can you begin by telling us where you were born, raised, etc., and how you got into the police?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Gwedo, but at a young age we moved to Fort Victoria, or Msvingo as it is now. So I did my junior school and high school there, and then for A levels I went back to Gwedo to Chaplin for a year. So I suppose it was only in my M level year at Fort Vic, started thinking about national service was inevitable and where I was going to do it. So I actually saw a advert for joining the army and doing the officers course. So I went up to Harare, saw, as he was then, Lieutenant Logan, and signed up to do a OSV in, I think it was like the 10-day VAC in 1975. As it turned out, I shouldn't have been on the course because I was still too young. But it was a fantastic week, of course, meeting all these regulars who were vastly experienced in that, but also going on the course. The only person, there were 3 schoolboys on the course, and the only one who got through was Mike Rich, who ended up in SAS. So I did that. Then during A-level year, I was sort of torn between the police and the army. I'd got a veil watch in 75, so I could go back again. And I did go back, but I don't think my heart was in it, even though I knew exactly what they were going to test us on. I hadn't prepared any speeches or that. So not surprisingly, I got a fail. So
Can you give us an overview of what that 10-day trial run entailed?
Yeah, so a lot of it was a introduction to the army, the various regiments, the capabilities of armored cars and mortars and whatnot. There was a obstacle course we had to do where you had 44-gallon drums, half full or 3/4 full of water, which you had to get across certain obstacles. And I must say, some of the obstacles to me, I doubt they could actually be achieved. I know in one obstacle, the directing officer had to stop us when we were basically going to drop a full 44-gallon drum of water onto 2 people's backs to try and roll it across somewhere. I think we would have just broken their backs. So that was a bit of mental agility testing, and I guess your leadership skills, because each one had to, you were given an obstacle, you were given about 5 minutes to look at it, decide how you're going to do it, and then attempt to complete it. We did their assault course, but again, I don't think that counted towards anything. It was more just this is what we've got. There were lots of lectures. We had a exercise where we had to basically infiltrate the School of Infantry and capture certain things. We got captured ourselves very quickly and held as prisoners in the squash courts for the duration of the exercise. We did try and escape out the squash courts, but when it looked like a few people were going to get sort of quite badly injured in the fighting between, I think it was the National Service officers and cadets who were tasked with guarding us. And then got invited to the officers' mess because, as he was then Brigadier Hickman, said, for some of you, this will be your one and only visit to the officers' mess. And in my case, he was right. But I mean, I actually found it sort of also the first time round a really amazing experience, and I'm just surprised more schoolboys didn't attempt it, although really the objective was to find the the next set of officers and not to give us schoolboys a intro to the Rhodesian Army. So
I learned, sorry to butt in there, I learned from my own experience of going through that some of the tasks were set up to fail you anyway. You just couldn't get it right. But they were, I quickly realized that they weren't looking for ultimate success of getting that drum over an obstacle or whatever. They were looking for guys that were thinking and giving instructions, taking the lead, showing initiative. I think the tests were designed at that as well.
Definitely.
Did you do the talk, the instant talk on some inane object or anything like that?
Yeah, so that I actually found. I think I was pretty sort of good at that sort of talking. It was just where you actually had to go away and prepare a talk, and for obvious reasons, you weren't allowed to talk about the army because obviously the regulars on the course then would have had a slight advantage. So off the cuff thing, I had to talk on nails for 3 minutes or something. Can't remember what my prepared speech was, but I think I did it on the essence of time, and but it was exactly what I'd done the year before because I didn't think about doing something else, which probably didn't help.
My talk was on toilet paper. I had to talk for 5 minutes on toilet paper, and you're not given any advance warning. You've just got to suck out a talk for 5 minutes on toilet paper. It doesn't sound much, but it's after the first minute, 2 minutes, okay, you can do that. Toilet paper comes from trees. Trees are grown. They turn into pulp, and then what do you say after that? It's just. I turned it into a little bit of a. My comment was, it can be used for wiping up the shit that officers give us as well, and I actually got a little bit of a smile out of them. I'm amazed
because I did that selection course, which was in January '77. I missed both the police national service intake and also the army intake. So I decided, because I wanted to go to university after national service anyway, might as well join the police as a regular for 3 years as opposed to doing 2 years national service. So I got into a intake beginning of February '77, and as it turned out, a chap I was at school with from Standard 1, he had failed the Air Force selection, and so the two of us were in the same squad, shared the same room. So it was actually quite good just going with someone you knew, but there actually turned out to be quite a few people I knew from school or sport or that in those squads. So,
and was there a process of elimination from the police like there was in the army? Were they booting guys out for not meeting standards?
In our squad, we definitely had a person who should have been at least back squadded. He didn't partake in drill or PT. He had sick notes, but his father apparently had been quite high in the police, so I think they turned a blind eye to that. There was just, so Depot was only about 4 months or just over 4 months, and there was only one person that I recall who actually got back squadded. So he was in a squad that I think went in December, and then he got back squadded to a squad that came in after us for the same sort of reasons, just not doing his, always sick parade and that. But I don't think the treatment of us police recruits was anywhere near as brutal as in the army. We certainly didn't have anyone in any of the squads when I was in Depot going to DB for 14 days or that. Probably the biggest punishment you got was behind the guard once or twice a week or something. But I mean,
and give us a rundown of that course. What did it consist of? Obviously, there was law. There were all sorts of aspects of being a policeman. Can you give us a brief overview and how long it lasted?
So training was 4 months, which was quite short because they were just trying to push us through Depot as quickly as possible. So you did law and police lectures where you basically went through the intention of crimes, sort of basic legislation on the powers of the police and that. We did typing because back in those days all dockets were typed up and we had this lady, Miss Lovell, who I think all the instructors secretly were in love with. And you sit in a room, and it's got a bit where the blackboard should be, was a big board of a typewriter, and then the letter A would light up, and without looking at your keyboard, you had to hit the A. And if she caught you sort of looking down, you got to wrap across your fingers with a ruler. But so I guess most of us by the end of it came out as pretty fast two-finger typists. So I don't think any of us were that good. We did drill. So every day you do PT and drill, law and police. We did a musketry. So first of all, we just learnt how to assemble and take apart FNs. Then we would go to the rifle range to shoot. A couple of people managed to get their marksman badges. I didn't. Then we had it was only a 2-week coin course out at Goromonzi, and I think the fact that coin course was so short actually put off quite a few people from doing their national service in the police, because in the army you're probably doing 6 weeks at least of coin. Even those people posted to urban environments, well, in fact, that they were far more likely to do party call-ups than us in the district, although in district you were probably out in the TTLs 4 days a week. So, thankfully the lack of coin training didn't result in any injuries or that. So, and then just trying to think what else we did, because they certainly kept us busy from 6 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening.
Who was that instructor that was built like a brick shithouse and he scared everybody? What was his name?
Mike Campbell.
Mark Campbell. Yeah.
Born.
Okay.
He was about 6'6". But once you actually got to know him, he was actually a really fair instructor. But I mean, just the size of him struck the fear of God into you. And the chap who was the depot chief instructor was a chap, Trang Ma, who I think he'd been a Commonwealth discus champion. So he wasn't as tall as Mike Lamborn, but and he must have been sort of in his 50s, and he was built like a brick shithouse. So
yeah, I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger would have had to look up at Mike Lamborn. He was a frightening beast, but like you say, probably a puppy.
Yeah, I wouldn't say a puppy, but he because they probably had about 10 squads in depot when normally they'd only have about 3 or 4 at the most. So we had to double up in single rooms. So one person slept on the bed for a week, another person slept on a camp stretcher, and then you swap over. And there was a big pass-out parade probably about halfway through our time in depot. So the one building was completely empty, and nothing seemed to be happening with it. It was just empty. So I actually went and spoke to Mike Lambo and asked him if I could move across there, because he was the chief instructor. So he gave me permission. Then, of course, all these other characters moved across without his permission. So one day we'd finished for the day, and then they said anyone who's moved into Appleby needs to remain behind. So, of course, I remained behind. He saw me and he said, I know about you, you can go. And then he shat all over the rest. But the downside of that, I'd moved into a double room in Appleby. So I actually ended up with this bugger that we wanted to, should have been back squatted, being my roommate. So he'd come back from PT in the morning after a really grueling session, and he'd be sitting cross-legged on his bed, smoking a cigarette and saying, this is terrible. I mean, I think if it had been the army, we would have probably given him a good beating, but we didn't.
Oh, geez, a lot worse would have happened to him, I reckon. So what was your first posting when you came out of there?
Yeah, so when you're in depot, you you put your, just in terms of provinces, your preferences, first, second, and third. So I put Victoria because I came from Victoria as my first choice, and Manicaland second. Anyway, not surprisingly, having come from Victoria, I wasn't given that, but I was given Manicaland. So there were 6 of us, so including my roommate, chap Paul Davey, who I was at school with. We were posted to Manicaland. So we headed up to Umtali, and the chap who was Propol, I forget his name, but he was about to be transferred or retired, and he was on leave when we arrived. So we were just told to stay in the peace mess, and then we were used as escorts. We went to Ruangui to recover a blown up vehicle and a few other things. And then, in fact, when Propol came back, I went with him as his guard to Chipingo for a night. And then on the Monday morning after that, we get called into his office to get our postings. So one of the chaps had expressed interest in going to Nalseta. So the first posting that came up was Chipingo. So I thought, well, it's just next door to Nalseta. I'll let him take it, you see. So when Propol said he wants to go to Chipingo, I didn't say anything. No one else did. Then he repeated it. So Paul said, "Oh, he'll take it." You see. So I still wasn't too fussed out. I naively thought I could get like entirely rural, which I thought would be quite a nice posting because you in the rural, but yeah, close to civilization. So anyway, I was going through the postings, and there were 2 chaps who wanted to go to Nyanga. So one of them got Ruangui for 6 months, and then he was going to go to Nyanga, and the other got Nyanga. And after 6 months, they were going to rotate. And then it came down to it was just me hadn't got a posting, and but before we'd gone for our postings, we'd canvassed all the POs in Tali, which is the worst station to go to. And without a doubt, they all said Buhera. So the last posting was Buhera, which I had to take because it was the only one left. But saying that, I actually think it was a brilliant posting. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere, and Enkhuizen was your bright lights, but was a great station. And then also spent time at a satellite station, Chirui. So at the time, it was a bit of a shock, but I actually enjoyed it. So yeah, so I ended up in Buhera, which was a bit of a logistical nightmare to get to, because even though it was part of Manicaland, the easiest way to get there was through Enkhuizen. But I went to Rasapi, spent a weekend there. Then I was told to catch the Doroa convoy from Inazura to Doroa mine. Doroa was the other satellite from Buhera. So when I remember driving through Inazura to the police camp and thinking, yeah, this place is a dump. Sudan taught me that didn't matter what a place looked like, it was the people that made it. And if I enjoyed Buhera, I had a even better time when I got transferred to Inazura. But so I went to Doroa with the convoy escorting the phosphate trucks, and the member in charge there. The next day, he had been summoned to Buhera to see the officer in charge. So he took me through, and then he spent the night and went back the next day. But and then the member in charge, or officer in charge, was Inspector Brian Meekings, who was a typical sort of old school policeman. There was a PO on the station, Steve Lowry. So he told Steve to show me the ropes and that. And yeah, at the time, I think there were just 3 of us POs there. So there was Steve, myself, who just come, and a NSPO, Alan Prentice, who had passed out whilst I was still in depot. And then Graham Nichols was the section officer on the station. So we he was our day-to-day boss, and we didn't really have much to do with Inspector Meekings. And then there was a chap, Doug McCrimmon, who was the special branch PO. He was a ex dog handler, so we had a police dog living with us in the mess, Pango, who, despite being this nice, lovable Alsatian, was also a pretty disciplined police dog, which Doug every now and then in the pub, when people started saying that dog's got a bit soft, he would show them that no, just one command, and this dog would just change character. It was amazing. But so he was the special branch PO. We used to have Brian Meekings, aka the Red Baron. He was the special branch inspector, and it alternated between him and a DI, Vinzale. And then at Churi, there's a chap, Jim Mann, who was the special branch PO there, and that alternated quite a bit. There was another chap, George MacDonald, and then a police reservist, Graham Speedy, who all did special branch stints there. So I started off just as a uniform branch rural policeman, and Inspector Meekings, the only advice he gave me was, for your first couple of cases, let the sergeants take the lead and just learn from them. And some of these chaps have been in the police 15 years, so who was I? So the war hadn't quite got to Buhera, although there had been contacts in the area. They were mainly just small groups moving through, so it was pretty safe between Buhera and Enkeldoorn. Less safe as you got down past Churi, going to Birchenough Bridge. But I'd say the war in that area only really picked up probably late 78, 79. I think 79 it was virtually a no-go area. But so as uniform branch policemen, we could still investigate crimes, although people got less and less willing to report them because they'd be seen as sellouts. So I did a couple of rape cases. I did a murder case. I wouldn't call it a murder case because there had been this. He was basically a robber, and he was robbing all the villages around where he lived. And I was actually looking for a group of people who were robbing stores, and I'd gone out on a Sunday hoping to try and catch some of these people. The best places to go to arrest people in TTLs was a beer drink a couple of hours after it started, because they're paralytic, and you go and you start talking about something else. You never go and ask for Joe soap straight away, otherwise you won't get him. Anyway, I was driving through this village, and one of my constables said to me, I think there's a body over there. So I think he must have seen a flag or something. Anyway, we go to this hut, and I've never ever seen so many flies on the outside of a thatched hut. I mean, the thatch looked black. There were so many, and of course, as you touch it, all these flies swarm up. So there was an old man at one of the other huts there. So we asked him to open this hut, and he opened the hut, and there was just a pair of feet just inside the door. So we asked him to, there was like a little homemade stretcher of wood. We asked him to pull it out, and he pulled it out, and the head stayed behind in the hut. But it had a one of those homemade sort of wood axes stuck in the skull. So it was pretty obvious how the person had died. So what had happened is this chap was being robbed by this crook sort of virtually weekly, because every time he wanted money to go and buy a beer, you'd see this old man as a target, you see. And the old man was getting pissed off with him, and even more so because he was telling this chap's family, "You've got to sort your son out," and they would say, "Oh, we can't." So he had come and asked for money, well, demanded money. So the old chap said to him, "I've just got to go into the hut to get it." You see, so he goes into the hut and picks up this axe, and then as this chap bends his head down to come through the door to the hut, just one smack over the head, and I mean, the axe was embedded in his head. So we get the body out, and we ask him, "Why is the body in your hut?" So he says, "No. After he killed him, he put him in a wheelbarrow and took him around to this chap's family and sort of dumped him and said, 'This is what happens when you don't, keep your son under control.' They then promptly put the body back in another wheelbarrow, wheeled it back, stuck it in his hut, and said, 'We're not burying him until you pay us compensation.' And of course, this old chap said, 'I'm not paying you compensation. Yeah, he's made my life misery.' Anyway, certainly for us, the practice was that you charge the person with the most serious crime possible, so you can always downgrade it. So anyway, it went to High Court, but of course it got thrown out, and the chap was acquitted, which was justice, really. So there was that, and then.
I'm surprised you didn't get something like manslaughter or diminished responsibility or something, but to be let off is quite amazing.
I mean, I think if I'd been called to testify, I would have been more for the defence than prosecution. But I felt sorry for this old chap because, the body had lain in his hut long enough for it to start to mummify, and
he was living in the hut with the body.
No, he closed up that hut, but he was living in the other huts. So I don't know. If I was him, I would have burnt that hut down and started again. But
it's fascinating. So, what other experiences did you encounter?
Well, that one which was a bit more light-hearted. So, this woman came from the same area where this chap had been killed, and complained of rape. And so we go to the bear hall, and she points out the alleged rapist, and we pick him up and take him back. But by now I'd moved down to Chirui, so move down there and take him aside and start questioning him and saying, "Do you know this woman?" And he says, "Yeah, she's a well-known working girl in the village." And what had happened, he'd come back from Salisbury for a weekend, gone to this beer drink, and actually spent all his money, and then was walking back to the village, and he met her on the path just outside the business centre, and basically said, how about it? And she agreed. So they just literally stepped off the path and got down to business. And then when they had finished, he said, "Can I have some money?" Because she obviously wanted to be paid for it. And he said, "Oh, terribly sorry, I've just spent my last money." So she was pissed off. So she came and reported him for rape. So, of course, when we confronted her with that story, she agreed. And whether he went off and bought her a beer or something, who knows? But from sort of there on, it got harder for people to report cases because any police presence was considered, there must be a sellout of that. So it was pretty sad. But there was one incident. So back before the war, Internal Affairs used to have these magnificent DC rest camps dotted around the TTLs. And they were always in amazing places, like on the banks of the Sabi River. And they, so that back in the day when the police could do 2-week patrols, they often used to use the DC rest camps as bases, and sometimes go out in tandem with Internal Affairs. But with the war, these camps had just been sort of abandoned. But apparently at one of these places, there was a generator or grinding mill that Internal Affairs had sort of left behind. So I think it was in a locked building. And they then accused a local of stealing their generator for his grinding mill. And so I was expected to go and try and arrest this chap and recover the grinding mill. But by then it was, you virtually needed a passport to go into that part of the country. So made one or two attempts, but it was one of these places. There was only one road in and one road out. So unless you were willing to be ambushed on the way out, you didn't really want to go down there. And if they didn't ambush you, they'd booby trap roadblocks or just dig trenches across the road. So, if you're going 60 kilometers an hour in a Land Rover, come around the corner and there's a trench straight across the road, if you went into it, you'd mess up the axle of the Land Rover. Anyway, this must have been going on for a couple of months. And then I don't know how this chap heard about it, but he decided that he wanted to put this rumor to bed that he had stolen Internal Affairs' generator. So he went to Buhera to say, look, guys, come with me. You can check the number on my generator. It's not going to be the same serial number as you think it is. Anyway, Internal Affairs decided instead of them going to check this out, they'd get me to do it. So this chap came to, the next time vehicles went to Buhera, they picked him up, brought him to the camp, and then we headed off to find his generator so I could check the serial number. And we'd only gone probably 10 k's down towards Birchcliff Bridge. And we came round and there was this cutting through some granite boulders. They'd been blasted when they built the road. And it was just full of chopped down trees and that. I thought that in the back of... So we had a Land Rover and a Puma with us, and I probably had about 8 constables and police reserve. So I said to them, get the rope out the Puma, because then we could just attach that around the roadblock and then just reverse to pull it to bits, because I was wary of booby traps. So, of course, they look in the back of the Puma, and then one of them says, oh, no, but we took the rope out when we were doing stables, which was where you check the vehicles first thing in the morning. So the rope's back at camp. So I was a bit hacked off, and my Land Rover was probably 5 yards, if that, from this roadblock, because I was in front. So I said to this chap who was going to show us his generator just to start pulling the logs off, but I suppose I didn't warn him that it could be booby trapped. So with that, the radio goes, it was Buhera trying to get hold of me. So I start speaking to them, and then speaking to Steve Lowry. And he says, oh, where are you? So I told him. So he says, oh, I'll rephrase that then. If you ever get out of there, please come to Buhera. Member in charge wants to see you. Anyway, with that, this poor chap lifted a log, and there was just probably about 5 or 6 stick grenades attached to it. And he says he saw the white smoke, and luckily he started running, because then these stick grenades start going off. So not surprisingly, the constables who were sort of in a defensive position around the vehicles started firing, because they thought we got ambushed. I thought we got ambushed because there was these explosions and then gunfire. So I had to cut Steve Lowry off and say, no, we've been ambushed. So then I realised that there's no return fire, so I told them to stop firing. Anyway, this poor chap had now disappeared into the hills. So we actually cleared the roadblock, and then we drove through a couple of k's just in case we saw him at the side of the road or that. Then we turned around and went back. And so I thought, well, that's the last we see of him. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, he turns up at Chirui with his logbook for his generator. So I said to him, what happened to you? So he said, no, I thought you were trying to kill me. And anyway, we had a good laugh about it. But I was convinced that the generator he had was not the internal affairs one, and I think internal affairs accepted that.
Tell me, the vehicles you're driving around in at that stage, were they mine-proofed, or it had not got to that point at that stage?
No, definitely mine-proofed. Yeah, so the Land Rovers were all mine-proofed. They had that sort of like cage.
Yeah, and were guys allowed on the back? The reason I'm asking this question is that I know of 4 guys in 2 different incidents that were killed on the back of a mine-proofed police Land Rover because it was a rare detonation. Were guys allowed to go on the back in your area?
No, definitely not.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, one of the POs who I think probably replaced me, he was killed in a landmine incident, but they were, I think, sort of off road, and they had stopped at one series of kraals, and he couldn't have had his police driving license yet, so he was sitting in the middle. He had police reservists either side, and they were only going to drive another 100 yards, so he didn't put his seatbelt back on, and they had a landmine, so that was him. But yeah, I mean, even with pickups and that, we didn't normally put them in the back of the Land Rover because
yeah. Was that guy killed, the one who didn't have the seatbelt on?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, crumbs, man. And so what else have you got? I believe you went into ground coverage at some point. Is that further down the road?
Yeah. So I did say 4 months at Buhera, then I did 8 months at Chirui, and maybe I was getting a bit sort of bush happy, but George MacDonald, who was the SB PO for the last couple of months, I was there, and myself, I think we had a fairly good working relationship. So I would go out as his escort when he was doing his stuff, and if he wasn't doing stuff, they would come when I was doing my duty uniform stuff. And
sorry to interrupt. The photographs that you've supplied, that Chirui place, it looks so barren and isolated, and you've got trenches, and you're sitting there, and it reminds me of that movie with Costner, Dances with Wolves. He went out into this far remote bastion of American law and order where the Indians were, and that picture struck me as being exactly the same. You stuck out there like a tick on a dog's ball in the middle of nowhere, trenches 9 foot deep, running to bunkers. I mean, did you enjoy that life?
Yeah, I didn't mind it. I suppose luckily I was only there for one camp attack, and it was a pretty piss poor attack. I believe the one sort of after us was a lot worse. We didn't quite do 6 weeks in, 10 days out. We did it, I think, like 30 days, and then we had 6 days out. So you could at least do something in your time out. And if you're going to be in one of these remote areas, we always had a stick of 4 police reservists based, and they would do 2-week stints. So you'd actually meet some amazing people, and some of them would be sort of quite high-powered business people in Salisbury, and that they're always interesting people. So yeah, you just get used to it, and I suppose because you obviously didn't have ESC power, you had a generator. So by 9 o'clock at night, everyone was fast asleep in bed.
Did you ever see any women in that area?
You're joking.
Well, you'll be surprised. When I went through the minefield in Crook's Corner, right down in the southeast of the country, going into Mozambique, when we came back through the gap that the engineers had made for us, there was this beautiful blonde woman standing there with hair down to here, top sort of, this is in the middle of the back of beyond, and she was in the engineers. and you know what it's like for guys in the bush who haven't seen a woman for months and months and months. We were tripping on our tongues as we walked past this girl, but it's strange where you do find women. That's possibly why I asked the question.
Yeah, no, that reminds me that we did have a visit by a woman. I think it was Boxing Day 77. So I'd received this message through the daily messages probably about 2 weeks before that we were having visitors on Boxing Day, but half the message was in code, and the codes were locked in my safe, and the keys for the safe were down in my room. So I made a mental note, which I forgot, to go and get the keys and see who was coming. Christmas Day, we had an excellent lunch because the WVS ladies from Ingledorn had looked after us extremely well. So they had sent out all these goodie bot things. So Boxing Day, we're relaxing, and a couple of people have been doing target practice. We had a 44-gallon drum that was probably about 100 yards away from camp, and people would shoot at that. So I wasn't in my police reserve, my police uniform. George MacDonald was in a pair of army PT shorts, a camo shirt that was missing half the buttons, and he had a big beard and had a RPD, which he'd been using for target practice. Anyway, we're sitting inside having tea or something, and this plane buzzes the camp. And any plane coming to visit us would buzz the camp, to let. But more often than not, they just threw a newspaper out the window that was rolled up, so at least you could see what's going on in the real world. And that's when I suddenly realised, oh shit, we've got visitors coming today. So I tell my sergeant, just make the camp look a bit decent and get as many people into uniform as possible. I quickly threw on my uniform. George and I jumped into a Land Rover, and the airstrip came just outside the police camp. So we drove up to the top of it, and it's got a bit of a slope, and then we're waiting, and we can hear the plane coming up the runway, and then it comes up over the ridge, and I was expecting to see a Cessna of some sorts, but it was one of those Islanders. I think it's an Air Force.
Yes, the Islander. Yeah, the back door opens. Yeah.
So I thought, shit, this is a bit bigger than I was expecting. Anyway, it pulls up and it comes to a stop just close. So George and I get out the vehicle, and I'm thinking, this isn't going to go well, because it's not just going to be someone from Jock Rasapi or that coming to visit us. And the door opens, and the first person I see is General Walls.
Wow.
Coming out, and I thought, shit. As Walls comes out the plane, he sees George, and he says, "How's it, George?" And they greet each other like long lost buddies. So I thought, shit. And then the next person off the plane was our Propel, who was Senior Assistant Commissioner Alan Rich. And I'd been at school with his son, so he greets me, "How's it, Ruby?" And then the next person was the president, who I think was Rothel at the time.
Yeah.
The lowest ranking person to get off that plane was a female major in the army.
Wow.
So now there's like 8 of them, 2 of us, and 1 Land Rover. So in fact, this actually contradicts what I said earlier. We could walk back into the camp, but it would be sort of like a 400-yard walk. So I'm looking at this thinking, shit, what do we do? So General Wall says to the president, "You get into the middle of the Land Rover with Major, whatever her name was, and the rest of us will get on the back."
Yeah.
So I had General Walls, Senior Assistant Commissioner Rich, and all the other army bods in the back of my Land Rover back to camp. But at least when we took them back out to their plane, we made sure we had Crocodile as well, so people could go. But yeah, we would have been in serious shit if they'd hit a landmine on the way into camp.
Well, yes, and I mean, did you ever do clearances down that runway to see if tours had laid mines in the runway?
Yeah, we did it by driving up and down it. So, but
because can you imagine the Islander popping a boosted landmine?
Yeah. So funny enough, in the time that I was in jury, we only had one attempt at laying a landmine close to the camp, but they were doing it on the road, yet the runway was the other side of the road. So that would have been tickets.
Was that a tarred road or a dirt road?
Dirt road.
Mm.
But I don't know what happened, because they they actually dug this beautiful hole. They'd used the bayonet, that knife from a AKM to dig the hole. They'd piled up all the soil at the side, and then they'd gapped it, but they left the bayonet that they dug the hole with. So why they hadn't finished it off, I don't know.
Yeah, somebody must have scared them off. So what happened after that, Ian?
I came back from leave, and I suppose it was June, July 78, only to be told that I'd been transferred to Inazura. So initially I was a bit hacked off, but then I actually remembered that so our dispol at the time was a chap, Ken MacDonald, and my folks were quite friendly with him from when he'd been based in Fort Vic. And I told him that I actually wanted to get into ground coverage. And he was a bit surprised because he thought, where I was sort of close enough to the war that you'd want to be. Anyway, he obviously made sure that when there was this chap, Martin Sampson, who was the ground coverage PO at Inazura, and he had just been accepted into CID. So basically, I went to replace him. So after thinking that Inazura looked a shithole when I drove through it, I was now back there. But of course, you start meeting the locals and that. And there's this chap, Don Peacock, who was the member in charge. And Don, he was probably 6'8", 6'9" tall. I mean, and he was actually a really nice chap. And then there are a couple of POs. Luckily, I had a month sort of handover with Martin Sampson because although ground coverage and uniform branch, you're both information gathering, it's slightly different in that. And I suppose for us in ground coverage, it was fewer dockets to complete because you weren't trying to catch people and take them to court. So I spent a month handover with him, but he actually had a really good team. So I inherited them, and luckily I was able to add a few people to it. But so Inazura was between the farming area was between the Makoni TTL to sort of like the northeast, and the Chiduku TTL to the southwest. And my Inazura's police area just covered the commercial farming area and half of the Chiduku TTL. So the Makoni TTL, I think, fell under Rusapi. Now, the Makoni, there was a corridor basically from the Makoni through the farming area into the Chiduku, down to the bottom of that into Wedza, Sabi North, which was one of the big sort of transit routes for into the country. Our farmers were particularly adept at spotting where to cross the road and that, because even if they anti-track, these farmers could pick it up just after I arrived. There must have been a group of about 50. They crossed from the Makoni into the farming area and actually based up on a copy, probably 50 yards off one of the farm roads. So they're obviously going to spend the night there, spend the day there, and then the next night carry on down to the Chiduku. And one of the farmers actually picked up that they crossed the road. At the police camp, we had a stick of 4 farmers as a reaction stick to anything. So that 4 of them, plus they got a couple of others, then just went on these tracks. And of course, they'd only had to go like 50 yards before they had a contact with these chaps. There were no casualties, but the dropped quite a bit of equipment, including the base plate for their 82mm mortar. So although we didn't have the tube, I think without the base plate it was going to be pretty useless. That night, the police reserve did an ambush on a different road. So this was all new to me, learning these corridors they came through, and nothing happened. And then the next night, I went out with a couple of POs in the mess, and we put an ambush on this road, and they came marching down the road. But sadly, we hadn't taken claymores or anything like that. And yeah, once you fire the first shot at night, you can't see anything. So again, no casualties, but they dropped more equipment. And so at least now I sort of understood. Yes, they've got quite a few ways of going through our farming area, and at various times we put ambushes on different parts in the farming area. The only contact that was you could call it a success. The farmers decided they would fund their own militia. So the way it worked was the African soldiers or whoever were recruited were employed by the police as police reservists. And then there was a chap who'd run the farmers co-op in Azura, and then the hotel, but both of those didn't work out. So he was going to do run the stick, and the idea was that they would patrol around the farming area so people knew that there was sticks mobile around the whole time. Anyway, they were also doing these ambushes. So they pick a night when it's virtually a full moon, and they go out to the ambush site and they lay out claymore mines. But of course, the only problem for us is we never knew which way the terrorists would be going, whether they'd be a new group coming into the country or a group going back to Mozambique or just into the Makoni to see what's going on. Anyway, they're lying there in ambush, and they come along, but because they're not following specific paths, they end up walking between the ambush party and the claymores, and then getting tangled up in the claymore wires. So they initiate the contact, and initially we thought there were no casualties. About 2 weeks later, we get a call from Tini Martin, whose farm was close to the ambush site, saying that his labourers had just seen a body floating in the dam on the farm. So Don Peacock comes to me and big smile on his face, and he says, "How good are you at recovering bodies from dams?" So I said, "Well, I haven't done one yet." So he says, "Well, here's your first one, you see." And then, luckily for me, about 2 minutes later, I get a phone call from Jock Rasapi saying that I needed to go through and see the special branch person there. So I said to Don, "Terribly sorry, but I can't do it." Anyway, so he sends the NSPO and police reserve out. And in fact, there are actually two bodies floating in the dam, and they're both terrorists because they've still got their SKS webbing on. So these poor buggers, ambush had been initiated. They had rushed off in the dark, fallen into the dam, obviously couldn't swim and drowned. So we actually got them a payout through, there were rewards offered for you find an AK and you get $50, and you find this. So they got $50 each, because I had to argue that if there wasn't the ambush, they wouldn't have drowned. So, but anyway, they got a payout. Because in Azura was this big transit route, we often, support units when I first arrived were based at 151 Alpha, which was just outside Rasapi. But that closed after a couple of months. But we generally got a company of support units in to work the TTL. And Daryl Brent, who was the OC of Lima Company, already had a really good reputation for operating in the area. So it was a pleasure to work with him. And then we were fortunate enough, we had a scouts fort at Rasapi. So they were for ways deploying into the Taduku. And both support unit and scouts had pretty good success rates.
So at this stage, you were in camo uniform, giving up your day job as a policeman. You were basic. Did you have a stick of guys, like 3 other guys, 4 other guys? How many did you operate with?
It was sort of mainly just me as the only PO in ground coverage, and then I had a team of 4 African police, and of the 4, 2 of them had really good contacts. So the most of the information that we got was actually from these chaps going into the township at night to the bear hall, speaking to people. So I used to have a Czech 9mm CZ or something pistol, which I'd give my senior constable at night, because sometimes there were obviously terrorists going in to the bear halls at night. So he
was obviously going in civvies and undercover.
Yeah, I mean, generally ground coverage always in civvies or camo. If I wasn't going into the TTL, I'd actually just wear normal police uniform. I seem to be about the only ground coverage person who did that, but it sort of worked to our advantage as well, because I could meet informers in Umtali and be dressed as a policeman, and then if anyone else saw them speaking to the police, it wasn't to a special branch or something like that. They could just identify me as a uniformed policeman. I don't think my constables had police uniforms anymore. They'd been sort of ground coverage for so long.
So basically, the difference between you and Party was to get information and pass that on to other forces.
Yeah, so primary getting sort of tactical as opposed to strategic information about where they're now, what have they been doing, and then if there were troops to pass it on to, because some of the information you got was just history about what they were doing, but not necessarily where they are now or what they're about to do. But some of it was they're staying at this kraal now, or they're about to attack the camp in the next week or something like that. So that sort of information generally was able to get a support unit to react to. There was a stage when we had 8RR come and base themselves on one of the farms. So they reacted a couple of times. We had this big hill. It's probably about 6-7 miles off the main Umtali Rusapi road, called Ruamwi, and it had quite steep sides and a flat top, and but besides being a beacon or focal point to aim to go to, it also provided really good cover to groups, and you could actually have a lot of terrorists on that gomo without being seen, and then the kraals all around it used to supply it with food. So we'd sent 8RR there once, and one of my constables went with them, and basically they were still climbing up the gomo, and they spied some terrorists following them up, so they opened fire on them, only to be for another group of terrorists that were already on top of the gomo opening fire on them. So you pick your the right time, and there were plenty of terrorists on that gomo. Yeah, and if there were no troops available, then we'd go ourselves. But yeah, compared to the army or support unit, we were actually quite poorly equipped. We just had FNs. We didn't have a MAG or RPD or anything like that. So it was preferable to get the experts to go and do it, and we'd go along for the ride, so to speak.
And you had a radio, I guess?
Yeah. I used to carry the radio. That was probably my undoing, because Digby Pocock, who he had a SIS team or something similar. He was an inspector in Special Branch in Rusapi, and he had some information and was going to deploy with a company of HRR. So I get a phone call saying that they're coming to deploy that night and I should go along. So I thought, well, this is brilliant. I'm just going along for a jolly. So I won't take a radio with me because just one less thing to carry. Anyway, it turns out probably I should have had a radio because none of the Digby Pocock's team carried a radio because they were all dressed up as pseudo. But it was pretty amazing, despite the fact that there was a full company of HRR plus his stick plus me. They obviously knew where the terrorists were staying or had a good idea, and because they were skilled in the greetings and whatnot, they were able to, after visiting about 2 huts at night, pinpoint exactly where the terrorists were. So we came up to the bunch of huts where the terrorists were staying. And there was an open mealie field, so about 30 yards, 40 yards wide. So Digby Pocock and his stick and myself stayed on that side. And then the HRR went round, I thought, to surround the village. Anyway, we sort of lie in ambush position until first light. Just before first light, we can hear there's movement in these huts. And so we get up. As it comes first light, we advance into the crawl. But as we're advancing across this open field, we can see the climbing a small kopje the other side of the village. So I must say I was quite surprised because they must have walked past where HRR were presumably ambushing. Anyway, as we get into the village, bloody all hell lets loose. And so my immediate thought was that there were still terrorists in the huts, and it was these chaps trying to get out. And I was standing slightly behind, but luckily to the to the right of one of Digby Pocock's team, who had a RPG-7, which he promptly fired. So I had this blast of this thing just by me, and you could see the dirt kicking up on the ground where the MAGs were spraying. Anyway, Digby got wounded virtually in the opening. Couldn't really call it an exchange because we weren't. Anyway, we all took cover, and it's amazing. When they build those paths around the huts using bricks to sort of mark the edges, sort of try to lie behind one of those little bricks, hoping they won't see you. But because we were in amongst the huts, they actually couldn't see us, and we stopped firing pretty quickly. And so now we're waiting to see what happened, because every now and then someone with an MAG, whether he was being told to or off his own bat, was doing a bit of testing fire, and of course we weren't firing back. So there were a couple of little kids who were trapped in the one hut. So I figured if you sent out a little kid, no one's going to shoot at a little kid, and then the HRR will advance. Anyway, the small little kid stuck his head around the corner and just about got it shot off. So then I had to take my camo top off, so my great white anemic belly was showing, and then go out in the open. Anyway, so long story cut short, the goose escaped. Digby Pocock, I didn't realise his wound was as bad as it was, but I mean that was basically the end of his fighting days. But it was a shame, because that concept. I mean, if we had access to Digby's team more often, I think we would have a pretty good success rate. But anyway, we didn't. I was glad to survive that.
Mm-hmm. So those ones sleeping in the hut had obviously got out before HRR had surrounded the village.
You can see them climbing up on this hill, but because I was so pissed off with the whole thing, I didn't try and speak to anyone afterwards about what HRR were meant to be doing, or what they thought Digby was doing, because I thought that had all been agreed before I went along for the ride. So, but yeah, you might find they'd only stayed on the one side of the crawl.
And what was Digby's wound? Was he shot in the arm, leg, or?
He got shot in the arm, but it shattered the bone. I suppose getting shot with an FN or MAG does a bit of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. Crumbs. So what else? Anything else, Ian?
There are probably three things that were quite notable. We had this armed robber in the area. So there's a chap, Elliot Comer, who I think in the Udzi area, he had broken into a farmhouse and he'd actually stolen, I think, a FN, a 22 with a drum magazine and a third weapon. And then he'd actually try to kill, as it turned out, was the husband of a woman who was I don't know if she was a reporter for the Mtali Post or worked on the Mtali Post, but he tried to get into the house. He wounded the husband, and then he was quite often seen loitering on the main Mtali Road. But every time any police vehicle went out to look for him, he just disappeared. But he was robbing buses and this sort of thing. But he came from the Chiduku. So Don Peacock came up with a bright idea. So in the Makoni TTL, we had auxiliaries or SFA, but we didn't have it in we didn't have it in our part of the SFA and our part of the Chiduku. But across in the part of the Chiduku that fell under Rusapi, there was SFA. So Don thought, well, if he stuck, we had guard forces, guards on farms. And so Don got a couple of these guard force chaps, but made them dress up as, basically gave them AKs and told them to go and see if they can find Elliot. Anyway, they go in and the locals just about beat them up because they're pissed off with the goose. And so they, that failed. So then one of our informers, he came up with information that there was a business centre, probably just a couple of k's into the Chiduku TTL. But by now they'd started tarring the road to Daroa. So they said he's there and he's drinking beer. So I got one of my constables just to stop the first local vehicle, because if we went out in Land Rovers, we'd be compromised for miles off. So we commandeered this chap's bakkie. One of the African policemen drove. Police reserve stick all jumped in the back of it and held the doors closed. So, and then I followed in a police Land Rover, but probably a minute or two after. And anyway, so we pull up at this business centre. Police reserve jump out of the vehicle. Elliot Como sees them and starts hightailing it. And of course, people are shouting at him, stop, stop. And he doesn't stop and gets taken out by, I don't know who actually fired the shot that killed him, but probably about everyone had a pot shot at him. And anyway, unfortunately, he didn't have any of the weapons with him. So we loaded his body, took him back. But when you read the write-up in the Mtali Post, it's certainly a lot more to the point than you'd be hung doing a write-up like that. Because I think it ends off with Don Peacock saying, the whole district is delighted and that all that remains to be done is document the case. It was quite good putting someone who was going to kill someone. Probably the best contact we had that was information originated in the Chiduku TTL. So at the beginning of 79, all the RLI, RAR, SAS, etc., were all fighting outside the country. So there was very little troops available internally. And for Jock Rasapi, they were allocated 2 sticks, so that's 8 support unit soldiers or whatever. They were at Rasapi, and John Gray, was Superintendent John Gray, who was the uniformed Jock officer, actually gave me a call, and he said, look, there's a shortage of troops, but we've got 2 support unit sticks. You can have first option on whether you want to use them if you've got something you can use them on. And as it is, we'd received in from one of our more reliable informers that there were some terrorists who just arrived from Mozambique staying in Sharara Kraal, and the Chiduki TTL was sort of like a triangle shape, and at the bottom of it was the old Romsley estates, which with the war were no longer farmed. Then you had combination of Odzi and Inazura farmers on the one side. So that in that little corner was this Sharara Kraal. So these 2 sticks of support unit came. We chatted about where we thought the groups were, where was probably the best place to put in an OP. And then that night, so they came on the 4th. That night they moved into OP. They were just on the edge of Romsley Estates, overlooking this. There was a granite copy, but it had thick bush around the base of it, and then it was fairly open because of mealie fields and that. And sure enough, first light, they pick up patterns that led them to believe that there were groups there. Got hold of Grand Reef, and Fire Force were deployed, was 3 Commander, and they actually started off, they had 2 K cars, but the 1 K car had a jam, and so about 4 or 5 managed to escape the initial contact because the K car that was chasing after them, it had a jam, and I think the gunner might have even thrown the barrel after the gooks, so pissed off. So the contact lasted sort of most of the day. What I used to do is, as soon as there was a Fire Force initiated contact underway, I'd load a couple of barrels of Avtur onto the back of a RL, and then with my ground coverage stick and generally the police reserve stick, go down and get as close as possible to the contact area. So the K car and that could refuel there as opposed to flying back to Grand Reef or to Inazura. And so get there, and because we're now sort of stuck in this copy because to try and flee out into the open, they were putting up fairly stiff resistance. And Chris Cox has written about this contact in his book, because sadly one troopy lost his life. Another, so I think it was Brad Little was killed. Mark Pilbeam was shot through the eyes. Another 2 chaps were bayoneted. Was that sort of close quarter fighting. So where we were based was probably about 400 yards away from the contact. And so when they had Lynxes doing Phantom strikes, and then they brought in the hunters, which was a pretty awesome sight, watching hunters going in, one strike, then the second one strike, and that. But so it took sort of most of the day, and then Fire Force pulled out, well, probably around 5 o'clock, and then I drove to Grand Reef because they picked up a lot of weapons and documents and that. And it was actually a group that had just come in from Mozambique, but they were part of the Mombi detachment, and they'd actually come up through the Sabi, so they hadn't come the normal route in. And the reason they were in the area is Edgar Tikeri came from that area, and his uncle was like the main contact person. We caught up with him later in the war, and he had been big in trade unions in the sort of 50s, 60s, but he was, I think, was diabetic, and he was old and sickly, uh, and he admits that if he'd been in better health, he would have gone into Mozambique with the rest of them. But so they were based at Sharara because they were coming to see him. But anyway, so Fire Force had taken all the weapons and documents back to Grand Reef. So I went back there. We had a few drinks with them, got the serial numbers of all the weapons, and then picked up the notebooks to start reading. But so I think in the end, 27 terrorists were killed in the contact. The next day, we went back to the site because also the chaps who'd parachuted in, their parachutes were still needed to be collected in that. And so we found these tracks where someone who was wounded had actually dragged themselves away from the contact site. So we follow these tracks and we come into this set of huts, probably 200 yards away from contact site. And there's a group of camp supporters sitting around having breakfast. And this one woman had shrapnel wounds in her stomach. So her intestines were bulging out through these wounds, but she was still sitting. So it was her who was dragging herself because she couldn't stand up. But she was still in the middle of a hearty breakfast when we found her. I mean, their resilience. Anyway, we used her to identify some of the bodies because she'd clearly been in the camp with them, so she couldn't tell us, no, she wasn't there. But the informant who gave us that information, he ended up getting $5,000 for that contact, which was well worth it, I think. But yeah, it was just a tragedy that so many RLI people got, one chap got killed and others badly wounded. So there was that, and then must have been in about July, August of 79. So Saturday afternoon, all was quiet in Azura, and the next minute there's this almighty explosion, and so Don Peacock and the Police Reserve leap into a couple of Land Rovers, and it's coming from the direction of Baker's Dam, which was down on the border with the Chiduku TTL. So they go roaring down there, and the waterfall in Azura came from Baker's Dam, and so the pump house was in a fenced area. It was locked, but there were no guards or anything on it. So it's probably amazing that it took so long for someone to blow it up. So they cut a hole in the fence, gone and stuck some explosives on the pump, and then set a timer. And as it turned out, there were two of them involved. The main chap was a sectorial political commissar, but he was also a explosives expert. So after setting the explosives, the two of them walked on the main road to the township. So they actually had to walk past the police camp to have a few beers before they went back into the TTL to join their group. So when Don Peacock and co went roaring past to go and see what was going on, they go straight past these two African men standing at the side of the road, and they probably didn't even give them a second thought, but it was the terrorists who'd blown it up. So they went and had a few beers, and then a couple of weeks later, I got information that there was a wounded terrorist staying in a hut in the Chiduku TTL. So luckily, Daryl Brent was back operating the area. So Daryl and a couple of the sticks, in his one stick, there was a NSPO who I'd been at school with, a chaplain, and he was convinced this was going to be a lemon. So we went out before first light and we parked and had a couple of kilometres to walk into this house. And we're walking, and Dudley's saying to me, if this is a lemon, you know what I'm going to do with you. I say, no, it's not a lemon. You wait. Anyway, we get to this house, and it's a brick-built house. It's sort of in an L shape. And we look through the one window, and you can see the door's locked, but the key's in the lock, so you know that there's someone in that room. So we then go around to the other side to break down the door to go in. So one of the support unit constables smashes the door, and then as he starts going into the room, he sees the cupboard door. So in the room, there's just a bed and a cupboard. But when we looked in the window, you couldn't see anyone. But the cupboard door starts opening. So he just fires a few shots, and you just hear this, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." And so he stops firing. And these two Africans come out the cupboard. And the one chap quickly says, "There's a stick grenade on top of the cupboard." But he looks at the other chap, and if looks could kill, anyway, he shuts up. So we get them out, and we recover a stick grenade from the top. But these chaps aren't talking, so we thought, well, we'll just get them back to Inazura. So because there were no weapons, there was just this stick grenade. We weren't too sure whether they were just recruits or whatever. Anyway, we go back to Inazura and got one of those crocodile troop carriers, and we stop, and a couple of the constables at Inazura, but also including a tame goat that I had, who was now part of my team, came to see what we had. So everyone gets out and then get these two captives out. And the next thing, my tame comes to attention and salutes these two characters. So I thought, what's going on here? So take him aside and said, "Do you know him?" So he says, yeah. So he tells us that he's this sectorial political commissar.
Wow.
But at the same time, this chap, because he actually saw someone he knew, and this chap was clearly alive and not being badly treated, he actually then relaxed and said, "Yeah, I wasn't too sure what you were going to do with me." So yeah, so of course, because of his rank, we basically handed him straight over to a special branch at the fort. And turns out he'd been in charge of one of the 75 millimeter recoilless rifles used on an attack on Umtali. And although Zulu scouts went to have a look for it, they couldn't find it. But they reckon they could never know whether they could trust this chap fully, because he was always really keen to operate close to the border with them. So they weren't too sure whether it was just so he could suddenly disappear. But
yeah, very interesting, Ian. Because of time constraints, we're more or less going to have to end it here, unless you have anything burning in your heart that you want to talk about. But if there isn't, I think we'll sign off now.
There's one last contact that might as well talk about it, and it actually wraps up the end of the war, sort of basically. So in late December 79, the number of coming into the country, just every day there were these big groups, 50 plus, crossing through from the Mekoni into the Chiduku. And because it was a corridor, no two group would go the same way. They might briefly use the same path, but they could be 400 yards apart or a kilometre apart. And so we'd been suggesting that this Ruambwe and the second site be looked at, because they would be the only places that could hold a lot of. Anyway, I think it was on the 20th or 21st of December, Don Peacock was going through to Rusape. His two kids went to school in Rusape. And when you drove on that main road, you could actually see where the group had slid down the bank to cross, and they were making no attempt to cover it up. So he goes through, drops his kids off, and then goes around to the police station to see what's going on. And one of the farmers from Rusape here and his farm militia had actually sprung an ambush on one of these groups the night before, and they had dropped a 12.7 millimeter machine gun.
Well,
so Don just says to them, so that they were talking about getting Fire Force to check this out, you see. So Don says to them, there's only one place for Fire Force to go, and that's to Ruangwi. So Fire Force, which I think was a support commander at the time, deployed, and they just flew over the top of Ruangwi, and they looked. They came, they didn't see any movement or that, so they came and landed at Inazura. And so by now, Don had got back from Rusapi. And so I went to speak to the KCOL commander to see what they'd seen. And I was trying to explain to him, because I'd had a few fleeting contacts on Ruangwi and sort of knew the layout of where the would be sort of hiding. And I said, do you see this? Do you see that? He says, yeah, they're some quite well-worn paths. And I said, yeah, they're well-worn because those are the going between A and B. And he said, but there's no one there now. So he obviously saw the look on my face, and he said, but if you want, I'm happy to drop you off so you can check it out. So I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. So Don Peacock, who certainly suffered from FOMO, said, if you're going, I'm going, you see. So I'd already selected my stick of 4 to go. So then we had to get a few more. So Don would have so we could get up to 8. And then Rusapi had I think the main class was stock theft, but they had 2 sticks under a PO. And the next minute they arrived at Inazura. So I said to them, we're going to get choppered into Ruangwi. Do you want to join us? And he said, no, I'm going to go and follow the tracks from the ambush from last night. So I said, well, you're wasting your time because we're going to where those tracks are going. So you're just going to be 3 hours behind us. But anyway, he was quite adamant that he wanted to go and follow the tracks. But he said we could take one of his sticks. So from 8, we went up to 12 people. So we got ferried out. I don't know why it was just in one chopper, but to the far side of Ruangwi and dropped next to the track that ran past the Gomo. So whilst I was waiting for the others to come, this African male with a freshly slaughtered sheep comes wandering down the road. And so we attempt to grab him, but he spots us before we get too close, drops the sheep and goes. But at least that confirmed to us that there must be in the area, because he wouldn't be carrying a freshly slaughtered sheep normally. So once we got our 3 sticks together, Fire Force had then gone off. I think they got called off to somewhere else. We start combing around the base of the Gomo, and we probably only got 100, 150 yards from where we'd been dropped off. And there was probably 5-6 meters wide, this track that just went straight up the Gomo. So we thought, well, this is where they've been. So we weren't sure whether they would still be there. We thought probably not, but I just wanted to make sure that we were right in our assumptions. So we started going up. So Don Peacock's in the front, and there was this PO who just recently come out of depot, and he was quite pissed off that it looked like the war was going to be over before he'd had a chance to experience it. So he was walking next, and then I was third because I had the radio. And so I was on the radio back to Inazura because I wanted them to send vehicles out. So because the idea was we would just sweep over the top of Ruangwi down the other side, and then if there was nothing, go home. Anyway, next minute, all hell breaks loose, because we came up to a sort of like a ledge or plateau on the side of the Gomo. And as Don and Basil, the PO, got up onto that, they saw 5 or 6 guys trying to get into ambush positions either side of the path. So they opened fire, but the guys had already set up, there must have been 60mm mortars that were covering that ledge. So there was a brief exchange of fire, and then we were basically pinned down by mortars. So, but we were close enough to hear the detonation of the charge in the tube, and then you're just trying to get as flat as possible on the ground, hoping like hell it's not going to land anywhere near you. See, so luckily they didn't have they knew roughly where we were, but they were a bit out. But then every now and then would open up on us, and we actually realised we were probably in the middle of a sort of half crescent that probably stretched 400 or 500 yards long. It was big. So we managed to move to some rocks, which gave us some cover. And this chap, Basil, he had been wounded in the ankle with a bit of shrapnel from one of the first mortars. So he had a broken ankle, so it was a bit difficult to move. Anyway, I jumped on the radio to request fire force because we were a bit stuffed. And luckily, there was a Air Force wing commander who was going to Grand Reef, but he stopped off at Jock Rasapi, and he was in the Jock room when this whole contact kicked off. And luckily, Superintendent Gray was there and was able to say to him that there probably is quite a serious contact. So this chap got on the radio, just told Fire Force, abort wherever you're going now and get back to Ruambui, which fortunately they did. So probably about 20 minutes later, Fire Force reappeared. And of course, this time, because when Fire Force first went in, must have been incredibly disciplined because they didn't fire, they didn't move or whatever. This time when they came back, you could hear the old 12.7s, that slow, heavy thing. So they were using the 12.7s on the aircraft, on the chaps on the ground. So whilst that was all going on, we were able to get back down off the hill with our wounded PO, and he got picked up and taken off to Umtali or wherever to be sorted out. They brought in the hunters, so 2 hunters came in, but because the RLI sticks were so close to the gooks, they reckon there wasn't enough room to do strikes without getting the RER. So these hunters did a few sort of dummy runs over, and then the next month they brought a Trojan or something with a Sky Shot, because that evening the ceasefire was signed. So it was basically telling these characters, ceasefire is about to be signed. So if you stop fighting now, Anyway, so RLI pulled out, but luckily not before we'd been chopped out as well, because I would have had to walk out. Then that night, the ceasefire came into effect. Also, a company of 8RR got deployed into the TTL, but by the time they got in, I suspect it had long gone. And the next day, I think there were only probably 8 or 9 were killed in the contact. But they'd a couple of weapons were left behind, but their 12.7s and that they'd all taken. And after I left the piece, they found out that there were anywhere between 300 and 400 on that hill that day. So even Fire Force with what sort of like 30 troops on the ground, we're going to find it tough. So, but luckily no one was killed in it. So
I know Peter Peterbauer mentioned in one of his books, Winds of Destruction, how these guys were now starting to use 12.7 above the basic tree line on a hill, and they were shooting at helicopters coming. It was getting really, really, really scary because they'd adapted to the tactics now of Fire Force. And I think if the war carried on a bit longer, the softening up would
certainly coming.
The softening up would have been maybe purely with hunters and not K cars.
I spoke to a chap who'd been in a support company a couple of years ago. He was in that contact, and he reckons where they were coming up, they had a 12.7 that they'd rigged up in a tree, and you stick your head up over the edge, and you're getting shot at with a 12.7. It's not funny. So yeah, it's just going to make it harder and harder.
Jeez. Ian, I'm going to have to end it there. That's a fascinating talk, a very interesting career, diverse experiences, and just another thread in the tapestry of our story. I just want to thank you very much for coming on board. It was fascinating to listen to all of that. And as usual, my reminder is to please come forward and tell us your stories. I'm saying this to the audience, please. We want to hear a lot more.